So let's wrap up drums by looking at the drum buses and the effects that I'm using on drums. So remember in the first video, I muted my parallel compression track here. Let's go through that now and see what's happening. First things first, for the input of this parallel compression track, I don't use the same one. See how I've got the input of my main drum bus is drums. The input of this one is called crush. I'm using sends here, so you can see all my sends on the first one in the list here. Sending to the crush bus, and basically how I do this is I highlight all of my drum tracks here, hit Command Alt H, and this is copy to send. So it basically copies all of my fader positions here to send A. So I do that, and then I basically just adjust the levels to try and get more kit, bring the cymbals down in this track so that in the heavy compression track in parallel, I don't have a bunch of swooshing, wishy-washy cymbals in there. I want it to be mostly just the kick, snare, and toms. So let's dig into what this parallel track is all about here. So first thing, I noticed the low end of the kick was making the compressor work a little bit too hard and not giving it, you know, the balance I wanted of compression between the kick and snare. So I just filtered out a little bit of the low end from this track here. Let's bring up both the compressor and this EQ to see the difference here. So EQ bypassed. Just helps it work more evenly on the kick and the snare. So let's look at this SSL bus compressor. I like to use the pumping preset here. Really just adds a lot of snap and attack to the drums there. And then I've got the Devil Lock plugin again. So remember I used this on the parallel snare track. I'm going to use it here again on the parallel drum bus. So just doing a little bit of compression, you know, it's not even at the one knob, tiny bit of crunch to add some distortion, some thickness to it. A little bit of the darkness knob here just to roll off some of the high end so it's not a harsh sound. And I've only got a little bit of mix because this thing is crazy in how aggressive it is. So just listen to what this is doing. So the goal with any parallel drum compression bus is just to over compress it, really slam it, and make it kind of crazy punchy and big in an unnatural way, and then just blend that in with underneath the regular drum bus to add some more punch. And in this case, I'm doing that with a combination of the SSL bus compressor pumping a little bit and then also the Devil Lock. Hear how it's very focused on the kick and snare and toms, not much cymbals. That's because I brought down the send level of the cymbals again. A little bit of EQ, just boosting some top end, about 7K, doing a little shelf here. That's it. Mostly I just wanted some more bright attack out of the snare. That's why I'm doing that there. Okay, so let's bring in our normal drum bus again, and let's just slowly bring this up. Hear how it's mixed low enough that it's subtle, that it's just adding that punch in without making the rest of the kit sound unnatural at all. My parallel drum bus, I'm really focusing on the snare. I find it really helps the most for snare to really get that crazy front end attack that just cuts through the mix and remains consistent. Listen to, just try to focus on the snare and see how the sound of it changes here with the parallel compression track going in and out. really key part of my drum mix here, this parallel track. Okay, for reverbs, I've only got two happening on the drums at all, a gated reverb and a snare plate. And again, this is imported from my effects template. These are basically the reverbs I use on pretty much every mix. So let's go back to our send view here. So you see on the snare, on all the snare tracks, I've got sending to gated snare, sending to snare plate, and this other one here is just a special kind of exploding snare sound that you hear in the verses. I'll get to that in a later video. Now I'm also sending a little bit of the toms, just the body tracks, not the attack tracks, sending a little bit of those to the snare plate as well, just to add some ambience. Let's look at the gated verb first. Try to isolate it even more for you since this is kind of a subtle reverb here. Let me turn it up so you can hear what it's doing, then I'll bring it back down where I had it. This gated verb is just to give a little more length and fatness to the snare. And since that's the goal, I try to keep it a little more narrow. I have these this stereo return panned kind of in towards the center here. So I'll A/B it once again. Just adds a little more low end punch and length to the snare, a little more fatness. And then I've got the snare plate, which is kind of my big main ambience here. I like to use this Bricasti Impulse snare plate B. 11-second pre-delay so that I don't cloud over the actual attack of the snare. There's a little bit of pre-delay there before the reverb kicks in. And then I've got the EQ here just filtering out some of the low end because it's kind of a low end heavy reverb here, and then actually making the reverb a little brighter so the ambience is a little more present in the mix. Now I'll touch on this in a later video about automation, but you can see how my snare plate level is way all over the place throughout the mix. So in places where there's more space in between the snare hits, I bring the reverb up. In places where the snare is a lot busier, I bring it down so that the reverb doesn't kind of overwhelm the drum sound. So I've said it very loud in that section there. That's really adding so much size to my snare. Listen to all that space that you can hear by having this reverb so high in this section. So that's it. No room reverb on the drums or anything, just using the hall track for that. Just some gated snare plate reverb and a long snare plate reverb on the drums here.